I want to take a minute to welcome everybody who's in the room with us today and everybody who's online. Just like yesterday's seminar, if you had the opportunity to be with us there or to watch that seminar, I'm going to give a brief introduction of the Big Issue Seminar Series and why we're here, and then talk a little bit about our speaker and turn it over to him to steal the show as he's done his entire time with us. First of all, my name is Chris Gunter. I'm the chair of Horticultural Sciences, and I'm one of the committee members that started this Big Issue Seminar. And I want to talk a little bit first about the why we need a Big Issue Seminar. We created this seminar series because we wanted to get our teaching and research and extension programming ready to address some of these large, daunting global issues that will increasingly impact crop production, distribution, and consumption. Our idea was to invite well-known, forward-thinking speakers to launch us into that process of actionable reflection and cross-disciplinary dialogue. With all of the seminars, if you were with us yesterday, we've asked the speakers to present their view of the challenges that exist and identify opportunities to help jumpstart the discussion that will lead both to developing tools and applications for resilient systems, as well as prepare future leaders to navigate that fast-changing world. The big issues we pinpointed to start with are the transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources of power, climate change and the carbon economy, and then diet as a driver of the health crisis in the country and across the world. Why this transition from fossil fuel to electrical power from alternative sources as our first big issue? It's really because energy underpins everything that we do. It's a foundation on which we are basing how we're going to make that transition and how we're going to keep it on scale and on pace to adapt. This has never been attempted before, so we feel like this was our first stab at a critical issue. Furthermore, renewables-based electricity differs both in its nature from fossil fuels, far more than fossil fuels differ from one another, and we need to prepare ourselves for the challenge in order to get this right. So that's why we invited Dr. Simon Michaux to speak with us. We wanted to hear from him not only what the challenges are from his viewpoint, but also how we're going to cope with those challenges. Dr. Michaux has a deep intellectual background and wide experience in the industry, government, and university sectors. He's currently the Associate Professor of Geometallurgy at the Geological Survey of Finland, GTK, as you can see on the slide, in the Circular Economy Solutions Unit. He holds a bachelor's degree in applied science and physics and geology, a PhD in mining engineering from the University of Queensland in Australia. After his PhD, Dr. Michaux worked for 18 years in the Australian mining industry in research and development, and then for a year at the multinational engineering firm Ausenco, and for 3 years in Belgium at the University of Liège, researching the circular economy and industrial recycling. He then moved to GTK in Finland, first to work in the Minerals Intelligence Unit before joining the Circular Economy Solutions Unit. Besides these accomplishments, Dr. Michaux stands out as a highly credentialed source of information and ideas, which are widely distributed in the literature, YouTube, and other social media outlets. His many lectures and podcast appearances have gained international attention and stimulated lively debate. In the social media space, he sets a fine example in responding to critics who descend to ad hominem arguments instead of engaging in data and ideas. Like most of us, he's a scientist who takes a long and ultimately hopeful view of the future. And in this second talk with us, he's going to be speaking about a walk in the light green and unconventional solution set.
Sound okay? Is the sound on? Yeah, we're good. Right. Right. So this is the solution set that I put together after presenting the work that you saw yesterday a few times. What I found is everything I'm going to present over the next little while has upset someone, thus the title. When I say someone, it's usually people who control banking hedge funds that control where capital flows at the moment. So before we actually get started, in Australia, the Aboriginal culture have the legend of the Dreamtime. They believe their world was created by their ancestors in collaboration with the gods of the day. And they shaped the world that we have now. They dreamed the world into existence. I'm talking about the legend of the rainbow serpent. And from this era, it gave the structure of the world today, the valleys, the trees, the animals, and us. The reason I show you this now is the change that is upon us now, it is so fundamental. You could say that another dreaming is upon us, and we are the ones that have to do the work. That brings us to today's title, Walk in the Light Green. Now the title, a friend of mine was a Vietnam vet, and he used to describe to me, we used to work together, and he used to describe to me when they used to get their mission briefings, when they put the map up on the wall, and they looked at where they were going to do their patrol, and it was color-coded. And when they saw light green, it was meant light forest, and that meant heavy casualties, easy ambushed. You can't see them, but they can see you. You will be shot at. So our industrial ecosystems at the crossroads between ruin and the stars. And the question of what have we really learned is something that's not really that understood. So how much of what we do is inappropriate, but how much of that is driven by willful ignorance? We choose not to see things. We have multiple macro scale challenges facing us, all of them invisible for some time, but only by those who choose to see them. Society at large has put off facing these challenges with the use of cheap, abundant energy and inappropriate management of our money. Ready or not, those challenges are upon us. In this environment, if you're not getting shot at, you're not trying hard enough. That's a critique, I suppose. So I see challenges in 7 sectors. In order of pain threshold, they're all visible now. Debt saturation, currency reset. Peak energy, peak oil in particular, but also gas and coal are being geopolitically weaponized. It's the projected mineral supply shortage. Manufacturer complexities and our ability to manufacture and deliver stuff is facing shortfalls. Industrial agriculture has issues that need sorting out. If they're not sorted out, that's going to be a problem. Earth dynamic systems, biostress, you might call it climate change, but that's really a subsection of point number 6. And then we've got population pressures. But in the middle of all of it, what do? It's all very well to sort of shout from the rooftops that we've got a problem. What do we do about this? So when you actually look at a lot of these things in the parts that describe problems, there's often a script that says we're done, we're doomed. We're supposed to die, there is no hope. Forget the script, we'll make our own world. We are in an environment where who dares wins and fortune favours the brave. We cannot wait for someone else to tell us what to do or to solve the problem. We've got to go and do the work, and we're going to have to break the rules to do it. Our long-range target is stewardship of planet Earth. The industrial ecosystem of unprecedented size and complexity that took more than a century to build, with the support of the highest calorifically dense source of energy the world has ever known, that would be oil, in abundant quantities and easily available credit and unlimited mineral resources. So we started out, let's see if this works. Awesome. I like this toy. Right, we started out with a really small human system and a massive reservoir of natural resources and a really small pollution stream. And because we've gotten really good at this, now we've got a massive human system, a really, really small depleted natural resource set, but a massive pollution waste stream. Now we want to seek to build an even more complex system with very expensive energy, a fragile finance system saturated with debt, not enough minerals, with an unprecedented number of human population embedded in a deteriorating environment. That is our mission statement of what we have to fix. And after that, you can have the rest of the day off. Right, so this is what we're facing. We're hitting a point, society's hit many points before where things change. I call this a bureaucration point, where things sort of move along and oscillate for a bit, and then they hit a crisis point. And is the crisis resolvable, in which case it goes back to normal, or does something structural change? We've got two choices. One, we can do nothing and entropy takes over and our system fragments apart. Or two, we can rise to the occasion and part of our system can evolve. And the part that evolves is the part that survives. The difference between the two is, do we address the energy problem? Do we address where we get our raw materials from? Do we have an adult conversation of the real issues and the possible solutions? That last part seems to be the hardest bit of all. This is some, to let you know the scale of what we're dealing with here. Over the last couple of 100 years, history's gone in a series of cycles. There's been a series of global empires that have come through, and each one lasts about 100, is it 200 years, 200 years, whatever it is, and there's a period of crisis in the transfer point. We are in such a time. And we are there now. We are right at this point here. Peak oil, currency default, COVID-19, the IMF Great Reset, climate change, cats and dogs living together. There's everything you can think of happening all at once. And we're in what we call Thucydides' trap. And the next empire that wants to take shape around us will be China-based. Whether they're successful or not remains to be seen. But this is actually the scale of what we're looking at. This is not another quarterly report. This is not about, bringing in a new politicians or forming a new political party or a stern letter to the editor. This is actually quite a very serious structural human civilization transition that we are in. So what's behind each one? Well, oil-based. The last one was coal-based. And everything before that was who controls the trade routes or the flow of stuff. Right, so if the flow of stuff and energy is the thing, what's our energy now? We're getting rid of fossil fuels. What do we replace it with? It'll be mineral-based in some form. Who controls the minerals industry? Yeah. So when we talk about the commodities industry, the moment when we hear about it on the news, usually it's in the form of market price, economics. And sometimes we talk about technology that's behind it. And that's where it stops. Really what's happening is this. There's technology, minerals, economics, and energy. And when you have one, you have all three. You cannot part them. They are all there. And all of those four systems are harvesting things from the natural environment, the planetary natural environment at a planetary scale. So this is how it's really happened all along, and any new system will have to actually sort of be restructured accordingly. Our relationship between all four aspects and the planetary environment is evolving. And we have to actually ride that wave or be left behind. And that is actually what's happening to us at the moment. Now, this is actually my personal view, but this is something that needs to be understood. We live in a system. I like James Lovelock's idea of, like everything's a system. But you often sort of hear in the environmental movement, they'll talk about, carbon pollution in the air. And I'll talk about plants and animals, but really you've actually got separate systems that are in parallel. We've got the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the geosphere. I've yet to see any other analyst talk about the geology systems we all sit on and interact with, and that everything interacts in the magnetic field with the sun. So the system we call planet Earth is actually in a larger system called the solar system, and it's the sun that dictates terms of whether we live or not. We have to have that fundamental understanding in everything we do, and at the moment, we don't. Right, so what I'm sort of saying here is, okay, for the last century or so, things have not necessarily gone to plan, but instead of actually sort of flogging ourselves with regard to guilt and how things have gone poorly in the past, is we've really got to put all that aside and walk into the future, and we've got to do it with a positive attitude or we're done. The problems in front of us are really, really large. So we've got to have a positive attitude, not only to the problems, but with each other. And so, what do we do? Well, we can sort of see some trouble forming up around us, but we've actually got to make a choice. What kind of world do we want to live in? And then we've got to decide who we are. Do we let fear dictate our policies, or do we let imagination take our way forward? And then we start to actually understand what's really happening, look behind the curtain, dig up that rabbit hole, have a look, and then develop a new paradigm. And remember, We dictate the rules don't dictate us. So for me, this is a picture I took in a place called Fraser Island in Australia. I walked across what was called the Blow and looked behind me, and there my footprints. I thought it was cool. But where I'm actually at the moment and where I'm actually sort of going, we're a very tribal species. There's lots of people, like-minded people, that like you to argue with each other. And where I'm actually going, there are no tribes. And so I'm not here to follow the path of others. I'm here to actually sort of make my own way. And I'm going into places that there is actually no one else at the moment. So the existing system is failing, and the planned green transition will not work, but we are required to solve the same problems. The circular economy and the steady state economy will need to evolve. They're the only systems that can, but it's up to us to build that new system. And that new system requires a new relationship with energy, raw materials, and the planetary environment, and frankly, each other. The whole system is about to evolve to a new equilibrium. Now, we need a better plan, but for me personally now, what I'm now going to try and do is, instead of actually trying to fix a plan, like my cool graphic I found, instead of actually trying to fix an existing system or evolve in an existing city, I'm going to go to a completely uncharted frontier and start from scratch and build something from scratch. But the hardest thing in front of us is actually us. We must change our paradigm. Now, this is coming from personal experience of trying to actually interact with people all over the world. People in charge in particular, we all want a magic bullet, a solution that magically fixes everything quickly, a universal solution that requires no effort or change of behavior on their part or any of their constituents. But we want someone else to develop that solution. The market will fix it. Human innovation is amazingly powerful. Someone will think of something. Right, denial is even more powerful. And then when they see it, we all want it. And we want to get rich. They want to take it, they want to control it, and then they want us to step in before anyone else gets it. They want to be the third owner of the gym. And if those conditions are not met, they will not understand, they will not engage in any problem solving at all, which is why nothing happens. So everything I've seen so far looks like a patch, what I call a patch. We want to take out one part of the solution, one part of the problem, substitute it with something else, and then life goes on if nothing changes. Take away the ICE car, rip it out, put in an electric vehicle in its place, and life goes on, nothing else changes. Oh, and we're going to get richer. All existing solutions I've seen so far are based on ideology, and there's very little practical thinking, like engineering, feasibility study, or even scoping study level that's gone into them. And to be frank, many of them look like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. But none of us actually want to actually meet this directly. So our most difficult, challenging problem ahead at the moment is the evolution of how we see things as a society. Most difficult task is the restructuring of personal responsibility in a new social contract. If we can get even halfway down that solution, everything else will be easy in comparison. So we are the solution, but we are also the problem in terms of what's between our ears, in our hearts, and between each other. My wife's done some of this artwork, and I rather like putting it in my presentations. So this is what we need to do. We've got to get to the point where, if instead of trying to sort of push along and things getting harder and harder and harder, how will we restructure what we've got in a way where suddenly things become easier? Develop what works in the current circumstances as opposed to what used to work 50, 60 years ago. Evolution, doing things better. Revolution, doing better things. Or my favorite, and where most science seems to happen, exploiting the accident. That's funny. Right. So this is the long-range target that I'm actually set for myself in what I'm about to describe. I call this Jack's Rest. We want a human civilization, sustainable human civilization post-fossil fuels. There are 3 frontiers to operate on. Most of my work so far has been in this one here, industrial raw materials and energy. We need a counterpart and interaction with the planetary environment, things like how we grow our food and how we actually manage our waste plume in that environment. In fact, most of the people I've met in the last couple of days are actually better suited for that than anyone else I've actually seen. So you might actually be part of this. And the third one is, well, how do we develop a new social contract? And that is well and truly out of my expertise. And that is actually something we have to develop over time. But when we're talking in terms of sustainability, you often sort of hear this sort of thing here where people will interchange these terms as if they're the same. So a raw materials policy is not the same as an environmental policy. So we've got manufacturing, combined heat, power, backing from the biomass systems, forestry, biomass industries, food production, there's all sorts of stuff in there that we've got to manage along that link. Biofuels. I hear biofuels a lot and how it's going to actually take over and replace petroleum. And there's no sort of understanding about, how much is going to be extracted out of the system if we're going to do that. Right, so then there's the link between the new social contract and the energy systems. And this is what Europe does terribly. They say new society, solar panels, and they move on. Right, so it's not the same. So we've got to understand that society in every winner has a relationship with our industrial systems, and everything we do has to have a purpose, sensible purpose. And if it doesn't have a sensible purpose, we shouldn't do it. And there's perceived value in there as well that we need to manage. And our society contract is not the same as our planetary environment interaction. In here, we've got a recognition that we are part of the natural environment, not something that we're separate to and can make money from. We have to understand that we are a relationship with the planetary environment at all its scales, and there's a perceived, everything we do has to have a perceived value in that context, or we should not do it. So, but once you've got all those three wings together and you merge them, integrate them into one place, then we can move into the center. So all of this stuff around the edge has to be done first. And every policy I've seen so far thinks the part in the center is easy, and it's just a simple matter of writing a memo and we're done. So I call this Jack's Rest. The reason I call that is in honor of Jack Fresco, who actually organized the Venus project, which I'll be talking about later. The Swedish government saw yesterday's presentation about a year ago, and they their exact words were something along the lines of, all right, smart guy, you've scared us, but now you're going to fix it. They asked me to rewrite the circular economy in context of my work. And so I proposed a resource balanced economy, which is supposed to be the start of the conversation. It's not the solution, it's a stab, and it's actually publicly available. And some of the ideas I'll be looking at here. So the resource balanced economy has a series of goals and tactics. A new system of governance, a new energy system, a new relationship with materials, including its source, new social contract, new relationship with the environment, a new monetary system, and a new manufacturing system. It's literally reinventing everything from the ground up. They're strategic goals. Tactical goals, how do we get there? Resource accounting, embodied energy consumed versus strategically useful outcomes, management or dynamic equilibrium, strategic design. You imagine if we design things that could be recycled and they could be easily handled, how easier things would be. Right, statistical entropy coupled with material flow analysis of each resource at an industrial level. A lot of jargon there, but it's an industrial ecological term. Biophysical signatures and limitations, and got to manage the technological evolution and devolution of our system. Some things will be dropping out, new things will be coming in, they all need resources. So these are tactical tasks. All systems will be attempted to reduce pollution and support the maintenance of biodiversity as we evolve. Here's the net position we find ourselves in, call it the rock and the hard place. Two inverted perimeters, the one on the left is energy, and the one on the right is minerals. We need energy. Where are we? Yeah, we need energy for the minerals. Our energy sources a century ago were these massive, really high quality reservoirs of oil. And now we've got these really, really, really nasty, small, hard to work deposits that we've got to do a lot of capital to get to. So our energy return on energy invested has reduced. Meanwhile, for our minerals, we started out these really high grade deposits that are really small. In Canada, when they first settled the North American continent for Europeans, is they found these massive boulders of copper in the actual streams. They used to pull them out and process them. And they were really shocked. They thought the world was going to end when they had to actually start digging up out of the ground. And now we've got these massive open pits with cut-off grades of 0.1%. So what do we have to do? Our energy systems need to be replaced. And if it's not high density, then we can't maintain our existing technology. Wind and solar power, solar panels aren't going to do it. We need something else. We also need to actually think about where we're getting our raw materials from. Is this the only way we need to do this? We all think it's normal. Energy. So this is every single energy system I've looked at so far has a bottleneck, some sort of logistical bottleneck, including the fossil fuel systems we have now. One of them has to evolve if we're going to get through this. And the one that's actually in the closest position to do that is actually nuclear. Conventional nuclear is not the answer. It's too complex and it can't actually expand fast enough to be useful. And it's too difficult to maintain with specialist equipment and people. This is a report that was actually, it's actually the status report of some research and development for a couple of decades. And it describes what's called liquid fuel fission. In this case, using thorium as the fuel. Conventional nuclear is solid fuel fission, and it has its difficulties. This is liquid fuel, and it was proven to work. This is what they're describing. It's a nuclear reactor that does not need water to cool down. Thorium salt is put in the reactor. It is bombarded with neutrons inside the reactor, so it becomes an isotope of uranium with a very short half-life. That uranium generates heat through radiation, and salt heats up and becomes a liquid. And in liquid form, it rotates, it moves around the whole circuit, and heat exchange happens, and the heat then generates electricity. The footprint of this system is so small, it's almost not nuclear. So this is the pilot scale system they ran at the Oak Ridge in 1969, 6,000 hours of uninterrupted power generation. And this is the system that's actually in China at the moment. As we speak, it's actually operating and it's selling power commercially. It's 2 megawatts and it looks like it fits in a shipping container. So the age of Thor is upon us. And I think this energy system will change things. So let's look at that. On the bottom, we're going to look at conventional uranium light water reactors. We're going to generate electrical power for 1 year in one electric power generator. We start out, we take 123 million tons of uranium ore, and we produce 278 tons of yellow cake. We then process that and enrich it, and we get it down to 32 tons of nuclear fuel rods assemblies. Put that in our reactor, we generate our power, and after a period of time, we take it out, and we've got 96% waste fuel, because the useful isotope is uranium-235, which is only 4.9% after it's been enriched. We're now going to hit the same target with the thorium system. Liquid thorium, not solid fuel. Right, so we take 1.45 tons of natural sand, of which we have a lot, and we make 1.34 tons of thorium salt. And we put that straight into the reactor. And it's not, it is fertile, which means it's slightly radioactive, but not enough to have a classification. The waste that comes out, only 4 to 5% is actually not used. Right, so for 10,000 gigawatt hours, which is like a fairly large power station across the year, 1.34 tons go in and 53.8 kilograms come out. And we store it now for 300 years instead of 100,000 for some of the stuff down the bottom. And the isotopes are also useful in the medical isotope industry, things like xenon, strontium, cesium, and all that. So it's actually possible to recycle this stuff. What's interesting with this system is it's possible to actually take existing nuclear waste in small quantities and put it into a liquid system and leave it there till it's processed. So it's actually possible to burn up our waste products already. So this is one of those things, why aren't we doing this? And the answer to that is a little upsetting. It's so we can have nuclear weapons. You might look at the value chain in the bottom. All steps of the uranium system are radioactive, which for the thorium system is not until you get to the waste product that there's any radiation at all, That's the equivalent of running a hospital isotope lab technician to actually get that waste out. I believe that this has the capacity to solve a lot of our problems if we take it seriously. But that's the thing, we've got to take it seriously, we've got to discuss it, we've got to have an adult conversation. This is also not rocket science. Make batteries out of something other than lithium ion. So we've got theoretical volumetric density on the y-axis and theoretical gravimetric density on the x. Our commercial lithium batteries are in the bottom left-hand corner. But there are options. Now, we have yet to actually get this actually sort of, we're starting to get sodium batteries out. And so getting theoretical capacity and engineering capacity are two different things. So these are the directions we're going in. A friend of mine is actually making fluoride batteries. And that to me looks like, it's like the fluoride in your toothpaste. That's a waste product. That's a waste product they're trying to get rid of. They pay people to take it away. You can make batteries out of it. Right, so that to me energetically has much more potential than anyone else, everything else compared to the logistics. And most of them are found in industrial waste, and they don't have resource supply bottlenecks. We've got to do it though. You can't just talk about it, you've actually then got to go and develop. At the moment, the whole industry is hot for lithium ion. The valuable part becomes the process and refining into something useful, not the raw materials themselves. That is also not here. So we have to think about where we get our metals from. Here's your average copper mines, and they have capex of about 4 or 5 billion. They've generally got a grade of around 1,000 parts per million copper, and maybe 0.3 grams a ton of gold at the moment. So this is some copper flue dust that I actually personally characterized in one of my projects from a smelter somewhere in Europe. When we see like a monkey business name like this, what it means is I'm not going to tell you where it's really from. I'm going to show you the data. So look at some of these grades. These grades are off the charts more than what you would see in a mine. And instead of 1 or 2 elements at a time, you're seeing lots of them all together. Moreover, it's in a nice powdery form, in a nice neat pile next to your smelter already. You don't need to go to the middle of nowhere to get it and process it and shift lots of dirt to get to it. The reason we're not doing this at the moment is this is inherently a small-scale operation. Whereas the market is geared at the moment for economies of scale, lots and lots of tons. We don't care about efficiency. But if we start linking small-scale sources to small-scale applications, things might change. Now, we've got to change the rules. What is possible? What is not possible? We've got a series of formulas at the moment that we adhere to. It's across all industries. We've got to get past that somehow. Here's an example. A friend of mine at the Geological Survey of Finland, Alan Butcher, is working with the European Space Agency. And what they want to do is develop a source of oxygen and water from rocks on the moon. How did we get here? What's a little, I don't know if this is funny or not. Someone put a rocket in the microwave in the tea room to see what would happen. So we bombard rocks with microwaves. And you know, when you put like a bit of aluminium foil in the microwave, you see a lot of sparking. We're harnessing that. So instead of actually sort of melting the inside of the microwave, we're actually producing in the next research proposal. You're welcome. So what ends up happening is the rock structure breaks down and pure oxygen comes off this reaction. And it's an exothermic reaction, which means very little energy goes in compared to what we're actually doing. And you end up with little molten globules of metal. So, and what's weird is it uses about as much electricity as a hairdryer, which means a couple of solar panels will do it. So that's what we are doing on purpose. Yeah. The badly paid scientists will solve all problems. So, and you end up with these little globules of metal. So, your average basalt, this is a basalt, and you've got your iron oxides and your aluminium oxides. And oxygen holds everything together. Burn it, any rock with sulfur in it, like say mine tailings, are very susceptible like aluminium. It's a weird relationship. And things spark off each other. And so we're going to take mine tailings that are full of sulfur, creating acid mine drainage, put them into our microwave, make globules of of metal. Maybe we'll even drink the oxygen. I don't know. We don't know about that, but yeah. And so you've actually sort of got this thing where instead of actually going to a mine site to get metals like iron and steel and aluminium, can we get it off the side of the road? That changes the rules. Now, there's still yet to work out how to actually get the metal into metal ingots and everything, but what seems to be happening is as metal spheres are actually forming in the rock as the microwaving proceeds. It's a phenomenon we actually don't quite understand, and we found it by accident, but it's got legs, and it has the rules to change everything mining. Right, here is my cunning plan. Find an industrial site that's got waste problems. Get paid to take the waste away. Use those costs to offset my running costs. Put it through said microwave or maybe a plasma torch, which I'm also looking at. Then put it through a pilot scale leaching plant and use membrane separation instead of tier-to-tier leaching. You then have metal globules. Turn those metal globules into fine enough powder so we can do 3D printing. And you have saleable products. So in the same factory, the same shed in the middle of nowhere where I'm going next year, industrial waste that no one wants goes in one end, and saleable products with a very flexible design sheet come out the other end. And that, boys and girls, will be my revenue stream for my book habit. Right, so this is a set of tasks to be done. This is actually sort of put together based on the challenges raised yesterday. Conduct a Maslow hierarchy of needs loop, but instead of like an individual person, we're going to do it for a group of people. We're going to do it for a series of human systems like industry or food production or energy generation. What does each system need and in what order? And then you actually do them in order in a tiered fashion. Reorganize the industrial value chain around a low energy future. Very support supply chains that are inconsistent in performance. Retool the power grid. Instead of one big gigantic power grid, you have a series of microgrids that are connected. So if one has issues in maintenance, it can go down without damaging everyone else. Or at the moment, if we have one substation go down, the whole grid is at risk until they intercede. Develop an engineering technology that can cope with variable power supply. This is the whole problem with wind and solar is variable. If we can have a technology that can cope with power spikes, we don't need the buffer. Plan for reprioritization of industrial capacity. Existing things that are in operation now will suddenly become more valuable. Plan for a systemic merging of raw materials and energy feedstocks with industrial actions. They're no longer just cost of doing business. They are now rate determining steps. Plan for an economy that can shut down from time to time. It's not so much a problem here, but in winter in Europe, operating is a real expensive pain in you know what. So if you actually had a plan of dormancy where everyone shuts down and goes home for the winter without damaging any economic outcome, then all of a sudden everything becomes easier. Develop an engineering decision-making system that can define whether an industrial outcome is logistically sensible or economically viable to a new set of constraints. Energy should be there, like exergy, but I'd like an ecological term for it, like emery. Can that be used? Develop the ability to quickly find substitutes for systems that, when they shut down, what do we replace them with, and do it quickly. Evaluate what's needed and plan to do it in a regional scope. So in terms of raw materials, we all talk about raw materials, but there's a value chain. You can't just say raw materials and mining and go back to bed. So actually, you've got a whole industrial value chain that goes from mining all the way up to your finished product. And what this has to be replaced with, another one of my cool graphics. So I came up with 5 things. We need a material tracking or auditing system. How do materials flow through our system? And we need to be able to characterize at every step of the way what we're dealing with. And we need to actually have a mapping system of how each material relates to the whole ecosystem. And as different technologies come in and out, we've got to sort of look at an evolution of industrial systems and manage when some systems step out and one system step in, instead of just have it happen all randomly. We need a data information management system to make engineering decisions early enough to actually be useful. And So this is an entirely new concept that doesn't exist at the moment. So what I'm talking about is a map. At one end, we've got pure copper, which we make stuff out of. We don't get copper at the supermarket. It's like when you ask a kid, where does chocolate milk come from? They say, oh, the supermarket. Yeah. So we've got to start from the beginning. Where do we get our copper from? What are the steps to get through that? That needs to be mapped. This is what I've tried to do with all my work. You need like a systems flow map where all the metrics involved have to be put out with some sort of number associated with them. So that's how we get our copper. And we're going to do it where every operation that we do, we do what's called a material mass balance. What goes in and what comes out to the products. If we just sum them all together, we can work out what went, where, and why. And then there's a software called HSL that we actually use to do thermochemical simulations. That's cheating, but it does make life a lot easier. All right, so now we know where we got our copper from. Yeah, there's that little copper there. So there's our wind turbines. All right, how do we? There's a wind turbine. How do we make a wind turbine? Well, there's lots of materials that go into a wind turbine. And we've got to look at all of them. And where does everything come from? And there's all the subsystems. And so you've got to map all that out. And once you get to that point, well, how do we use a wind turbine? Well, it's put into a larger system. And in this case, well, it's embedded in with other energy systems. And then we've got step-up transformers and high voltage power systems. And then it gets all the way up to, well, it comes to us, the consumer, both industry and domestic. And everything needs to be mapped out in a whole series of systems maps that can be called up like subroutines in a computer program. So here's my concept of an information system. It's pretty primitive. There are more sophisticated versions. This is my first stab in the dark. Actually, no, it's a report I called a shot in the dark. So yeah, anyway, here we are. We must develop a system that allows us to make intelligent choices in context of future needs. If we do something and it has implications 10 or 12 years from now, how do we catch that in time to make the decision? Yeah. So we're going to develop that can define whether an industrial outcome is sensible, but should we do it? And so what technology is produced, from what raw materials, what technology is used to do it, how do we manage things, new systems coming in, and how do we keep track of what's going where? And how do we do it fast enough to be useful? That last one is the problem. So dynamic equilibrium, well, this is actually where we're actually sort of looking at. We want to have a situation where we want things to be stable. And let's say this, we're talking trees. Do we cut down all the trees? No. We want to cut down some of the trees and let some of those trees replenish in a stable fashion. So we need to work out how many trees can we cut down and how many trees will the natural environment replenish, assuming everything's working okay if we're paying attention. And we need to actually look at all of this for all of our natural resources. Money, I keep whining about money, and someone called me out on it. So, all right, what are you going to do then? If money has to change, what does it change to? By the way, you're more highly paid than most other people. Yeah, okay. So in this group that I'm actually talking to, we're going to set up a game theory lab to see about how this will work. But tier one, we're talking about a two-tier money system. Tier one is society's necessities. Let's say we're in a community. All resource management systems allows all citizens to have access to basic necessities of living, not the money to buy the necessities themselves. Food, shelter, power, drinking water, sanitation, etc. And it's done in exchange for contributing to society in some form. Now, whether we do that or not remains to be seen. So people will work to contribute and in turn receive everything they need to live. Tier two, the conventional money system. So where it says, well, we actually have two streams of income coming. Conventional money is the form of a currency, is exchangeable for goods and the way of storing wealth, just like we do now. So we have the existing system and another layer that sits on top of it. So we collect money and we spend money and we do whatever we want with that money. So these two economic systems are run in parallel or series maybe. And we have to build the society first before it can function. I'm actually going somewhere with this. We have a game theory lab concept where we're going to look at like, what will work over a 500-year time period with what's stable and what's not. Because every other attempt at doing this has failed. We need to understand why that is. And if the answer can't be fixed, then that's the answer. So how do we reorganize our society? Well, we've got to decouple from some systems, develop new systems, and socially evolve where we don't need others. Talking energy, industrial, human population, like where the people live, food production, transport of goods, and everything has to be viable, but we're probably going to organize in this form. Now, so why this order? So when you actually move to a new town, you've got a new job. You move to a new town. Your first priority is where do you live and what's your job? Every town has food available. So that's not the problem. The problem is, can you stay in this town viably? So for example, a city like Rotterdam, it's a port. That's why we have the city there, to do the action of a maritime shipping port. So it's the industrial system first, but before we can even think of that, where do we get our energy from to do that purpose? So here is a systems map. We start out with what industrial action is useful, and then we go to geographically organize and restructure industrial sites around the availability of energy in a low energy future and shorter value chains to a new industrial cluster architecture. So then the human population will have to wrap around that. But then we've got our food systems. Those people will need food systems. So can we restructure our agriculture food production where we can get food to those people? At the moment, we've got very long transport lines. What if those transport lines are not as reliable anymore or as available? So food, where do we get our food from and can we do it sustainably? Then we've got to assess bottlenecks, whether this is sensible or not. Can we go to, I like small scale organic food production, but obviously that's not the only way to do this. We actually need technology in there as well. Now we've got energy to dictate what's available. All fossil fuels can now be used in critical tasks for strategic or long-term value, or otherwise be largely unavailable. And if that doesn't work, we loop back to the top and we think of something else. And we keep going round that loop until we come into a stable system. And if it's not fixed, it doesn't get done. Right, so what technology should we use? Well, what technology and why is it important? Do we need the iPhone? Is it that important? Ouch. My daughter, all she's interested in this. Yeah, so what metals are required to make the stuff in purity form? Is mining sufficient or can we get it from recycling? And do we have sufficient capacity for refining? And then we go to, stated mineral reserves or resources. Do we have enough? And then we've got the constraints of fossil fuels, will just simply be unavailable only for strategic purposes only. Then we get down to, can the technology be manufactured using different metals, feedstocks, make batteries out of something else? Or is it really that important? Do we need the technology at all? Can we reduce it? Or can the technology itself be substituted by something completely different and completely change the rules? In which case, we go back to the beginning. Is the technology needed? And you keep going round and round that loop until we stabilize. And then all loops are put in a daisy chain together. And you keep going until you have a stable answer. The Maslow hierarchy of needs for electrical generation. Well, this is something like this. Where do we get our energy source from? Is it sunlight? Is it uranium? What's our raw material? Then what's the technology units needed to harvest the energy? And these are our options. What support infrastructure do we have? What's our distribution system? And then in parallel with that, we've got our other things like capital and staff, all of which are needed. But in what order do we look at these things in? They all need to be looked at. So manufacture, where's our energy coming from? Is it heat? Where's that coming from? What raw feedstocks do we need? Is it metals? Is it plastics? Chemicals. They're often petrochemicals, which brings us back to oil and coal. Potable water, components, operations, consumables. And then we get the manufactured product at the end. It doesn't just magically appear. And then we've got all the capital staff, maintenance, life cycle maintenance, all that. And in between all that, now we've got an infrastructure system. All of that needs to be in place, but we need to do it in a particular order so we can actually organise how we can restructure things. I've got the idea that we're going to collapse the industrial system down in size, but if we're going to no longer use trucks to move things around so much, well, the other option we could do is rail or monorail or a version of that. But then what we would do is actually put like with like. So instead of having our industrial systems spread all over the landscape, we're going to not compress them, but integrate them together and reduce the need of transport so they're all closer together, but contract those units onto the train line. And so we've got the thing where in one place we'll take all our domestic waste, industrial manufacturing waste, but also all the raw materials extracted from mine sites and where else we get raw materials from. We're all bringing it to one place, and we're going to sort it in one place and then redirect it to put the right stream into the right process plant. And then we will still have trucks and cars, there'll be less of them, but we will need to reorganize everything. So here's the biomass cluster. This is just some ideas. You guys could probably make a better, more sophisticated version of this chart, but we'll take all our waste products that are biological in nature, waste transfer station, and we have a series of treatment plants and digestion plants. Could we have a combined heat and power plant to get some energy? Could we have a pyrolysis plant to get some energy? Could we be using this plant here to manufacture organic fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides, and then get them back out to where they're needed? So merge all biomass systems to support food production into one place, and merge all biomass CHP industrial heat needs again into one place, and reinvent sewerage. Where can we use those nutrients? And if we can't use them, can we do something else with them to manage them better instead of just having it as a subsystem we'd rather not talk about? Food. This is the part where you get to throw rotten tomatoes and rocks. So this is the basic hierarchy that I sort of dreamed up late one night. What do you need in what order? And yeah. So, you can have a farm, but if you don't have the soil, you're not going to go anywhere. If you don't have weather conditions that cooperate, you're not going to go anywhere. And all that. My uncle owned a farm, and he found out by accident that if he actually planted his crops in moon cycle things, he actually got a better yield. And no one could explain to him why. But yeah, anyway, so and then you've got the idea of when you get your food product, you've got to turn it into something that's transportable and then distribute it. How do you do that? So what does the food system need and in what order? Right, now we're getting to my plan. The work I've been doing for the last couple of years has told me what needs to happen. Assemble all unorthodox ideas into one place. I'm actually putting a plan to actually do this. Give complete access to orthodox methodologies and cross-fertilize. Operate for mandate to reinvent the industrial system and develop a suitable system of high energy density generation. And then we've got raw materials. Where do we get them from? And develop a manufactured value chain to go from raw materials to finished products in one city. So we can collapse the just-in-time supply grid that's across 6 continents into one city. When the orthodox methodologies prove to be inadequate, turn to the unorthodox or accept failure. Use past unorthodox ideas that we've already rejected in conjunction with present cutting-edge technology to create a new paradigm where future limitations can be seen in a new light. So what have we actually learned? A lot of our solutions are in our past. This is the Venus project. It was developed in the 70s by this guy, Jack Fresco. His mandate was to develop a human civilization, or a human settlement, using the best science had to offer at the time. And if you design that city around the wants and needs and requirements of the people in that city, what would that city look like? So their work at the moment looks like a Thunderbirds episode, right? And so what needs to happen, it needs to evolve and become more practical. But I think they're the best vector and visible, and I'm hoping my work will be merging with theirs. And so they're in the process of restructuring the work around the idea of the commodities industry. And I'm restructuring my work around the idea of technology is a actual solution vector. And this is the vision. This is artwork from my wife. We're going to develop a research development hub. And then we're going to wrap a city around that. And then we're going to wrap an agricultural belt around that. And so the idea is a development hub well outside the Western world, in an area where it's not really there's not a lot of activity, and we're to develop an entirely new paradigm around energy, what energy is and what power systems are, and what technology could come from that. What we wish to do is build a gateway world worthwhile living to our grandchildren, with the harmonious merging of society, technology, and the environment. We want to develop a technology that will shorten the industrial value chain and radically change the industrial architecture. And along with that, and this is actually part 2 that's going to be developed by people, not me, because this is not my expertise, develop a new social contract where all needs of the people who live in that society are met without exploitation of anyone. Is that even possible? We don't know yet, but we're going to damn well try. Energy, the sourcing of raw materials, manufacturers reinvented to become much smaller in footprint. And if it all works out, we'll be a storehouse of knowledge of all kinds. And then a source of commerce and useful services surrounding societies in a few decades' time. So now we can begin. So, questions?
Questions? Stun them into silence.
Come on, there's got to be at least a few arguments. Thank you, Danielle.
Following up on a conversation we had about consumables yesterday. I noticed you don't specifically name consumer products in your presentations, but I'm sure you've given it some thought. I mean, I've heard you mention the iPhone and cars, but I'm talking about small appliances, large appliances, radios, these things that Americans seem to buy in mass, televisions. Currently, none of these are repairable. You cannot fix them many times when they break, and they're very difficult to recycle. I mean, we know about recycling programs. I see a lot of these things on the curb on trash day. So I wondered what your thoughts were on policies or practices moving forward that would account for or make a correction for the life cycle analysis of these products. Can we charge a fee to the companies that make these inefficiently and invest those dollars into systems that can make them better, or any other similar solution?
So we do have a plan. So let's say this community does get off the ground, and we are talking about this because in Europe, the real problem with recycling is nothing's designed to be recycled. It's all designed for performance. And the people who do the designing and the manufacturing on the other side of the planet from the people who they're consuming, and they don't talk to each other. Right. So what we're going to try and attempt here, and we haven't done it yet, so we don't know if it's going to work, but we were thinking of doing the following. First, we scale back our requirements of what we want. We simplify what we want. Yes, we will have a washing machine. Yes, we will have a TV, but it will be a simpler version of what we have now. And there'll be less variety of what we have now. So design them so they are possible to be cannibalized, taken apart in a boneyard context, and then rebuilt and reframed and refitted. The people who want to bring in stuff from outside, because inevitably they will, I learned this from executive branch training. If you want to change the culture, you identify the culture you don't want, you turn the oxygen off. Right. So if people bring in stuff from outside, when it breaks, it's their problem to fix it. They can't just put it out in the curb. Garbage won't pick it up. So they've got to put it on a truck and then transport it several hundred kilometres to dispose of it thoughtfully. They do that once or twice, they'll learn. We hope over time that we will then get into a consensus where we most of us are using products that can be repaired and cannibalized and at the end of life repurposed and recycled. The Venus Project has the idea where you design things to last, whereas the current free market idea is where you design things to be bought, thrown away and bought again. And it's the action of buying is the goal. Whereas what we want to get down to is we want the action of as long life as possible, followed by recovery of those raw elements. Now, we haven't actually done it yet, so it's easy to say, and let's see if I can actually do it, but that's going to be the approach.
Thank you.
So I have to follow up on a question and a concept that grabbed me from last night and ask something along the following lines, and we can answer it by reinterpreting my question because I probably lack what I really want to ask. If copper is so limiting, how do you remove that limitation in this kind of model that we have here? Is this because it's separate and small? And so talk to me a little bit about scale in this model and see if you can tie it back to the question of is there enough copper?
Right, so what's in that too is there enough copper for 8 billion people? This is the equivalent of a lifeboat stepping stone. We're going to do some things. We may not be able to do everything in one step. Can we substitute copper? At the moment, we don't think so. What we can try to do is scale back our energy and technology needs to be much, much simpler and smaller in per capita. So for at least the next couple of decades, there will be some copper available. The question is, what do we do with that? Because all our electronics require copper. This computer cannot function without it. And we can't function without that computer and do that. So in the short term, we will continue to use copper as we do now, but over time, we will try and design things that we can use less per capita. And what that means is we'll have less dependency on technology and there will be more onus to be put on the individual person. That's what that means. Is there enough copper? Well, that depends. In the current system, the way we use copper at the moment, no, there's not. As in, you cast forward 200 years, will we still be operating like this? Even if we do nothing and keep going? No. No, we won't. So how do we meet those challenges? The challenge of copper itself, I actually don't know how we're going to meet that challenge. It is so fundamental to everything. I don't know.
Somewhat related question to what Rob just asked. You've indicated at several points that we're going to have a debt problem because debt is a claim on the future, and the future is uncertain. So at some point, capital is going to become much less available than it is now. But projects like this one involve a lot of new capital investments.
Yep.
You must have thought through where this is going to come from.
So there are two capital investment streams on the ground. Right. If it turns out we end up having like we're planning to launch sometime next year. So try to launch as soon as possible. If it turns out that the system crashes and we have our debt reset before we are actually ready or we get enough, then it's all over. And we're back to plan C and plan D, where I set up my whiskey distillery and read the books I haven't read yet. The plan is to actually set there's two investment strategies on the ground. At the moment, they're being developed and assembled at the moment as we are. We're hoping to get enough capital up front because there's a lot of money out there looking for a place to land. A lot of people with money understand damn well that we are in a very difficult situation and it does need to be fixed. They just need a door to open that gives them a vector to take part of that being fixed. So if we can show that, and then we get the right people partnering up with us, and we get enough money to start, then we will start. If it turns out the debt correction happens sooner, like too soon, it means this whole scope will have to be changed in, this whole concept will have to be changed in scope. We will have to do less of it until we reset the money system. That's just the simple answer. We do the best we can with what we have until we can't. But what's also apparent is instead of actually modeling the entire planet and 8 billion people, and the same thing happens to all of us, some things will work in some areas but not others. It'll be non-linear. So how do you be at the right place at the right time to do something useful, or at least not be at the wrong place at the wrong time? That's what we're hoping. So is capital going to crash? Probably. Is it all going to crash? We'll see. Can I attach myself to a stream that will crash last? There are new capital streams coming up that are resource-based, right? Can we transfer to those? We'll see. It's the wild west. We'll see if we survive. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to come back here and ask for a job.
Very good.
So I also can't resist asking about the following very large question. Does there exist a modeling in your group think that suggests what a reasonable population for the world is?
That is an interesting question. There are lots of schools. I'm in contact with some very world-class degrowth scholars. Now, there's one group that believe that the real population should be around 1 billion people for it to be ecologically sustainable for the planet. But that's also basis on the planetary environment the way it was, say, 50, 60 years ago. And each decade it seems to be changing. So, but then you've got groups who talk in terms of industrialization. And they think that the population that we should have is around 20 billion. And that this is not an issue. And so there's conflicting views around me. I think that we have multiple pressures in our population set at the moment, and a lot of them are actually not allowed to discuss out loud. So population's going up, population's coming down. Should it be 1 billion? Should it be 20 billion? I don't know. It's my personal view that our population should be about 1/3 what it is now, because we need to spread out. At the moment, we have packed in so many people into all the really good areas. I had a discussion about this yesterday in Florida. All the best agricultural land in the world is being overrun with real estate. Right now, there's food shortages on the other side of the planet. How do you manage it? I don't know. But we need to have a system where there's less people that can spread out, and so you can have the natural biosystems start having channels and corridors between us. At the moment, that's not allowed. So to me, our population has to decline in size somehow. But then we've got to manage it. We've got to have a replacement population, and then we've got to have our ability to manage our education within that population so we don't go off the rails. Education is the key for us not going crazy. So population, education, carrying capacity. Loaded question, loaded answer. Sorry, I didn't really answer anything useful.
Interesting point about the spatial distribution of people. There's a very strong power law in terms of economic development, intellectual, and the size of the cities, which to some extent we can live and big cities generate more intellectual capital, and you're telling it to go back from there.
Not quite. Sometimes back, sometimes forward. So if we can have people into cities that are smaller in size, and yes, we've got population in them, and yes, we can use technology. But then if we have smaller settlements around those cities as well, what we need is to actually start merging natural biosystems in and amongst our human systems instead of overrunning them. Now, what that actually looks like, what the true answer is, I don't know, because we haven't done the work. Right, so and here's a counter question. I'm from the Australian mining industry, the corporate end of the Australian mining industry. And so this is going to really upset these guys. Do we need economic value? If that's the metric behind our entire system at the moment, is value, monetary value, if we were to scrap that and replace it with something else, let's say that's even possible, right? If everything was geared to something other than economic industrial output, what would things look like?
Some questions on Zoom, unless.
I think to the question of money, I think the cities is also intellectual art and other elements that make the cities interesting, why people gravitate to them. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure
so what actually
to break that sort of power law unless you radically reimagine how
So
people interact.
we need people who know what they're doing, know what they're talking about, to come together in multiple conferences. And as you have this discussion and work out the boundary conditions of what's possible and what's not, and if we go down respective paths of development, what that will mean 50 years from now. At the moment, we're all sort of flying blind and throwing ideas out there without any real support behind them, including me. Because that idea I just told you, there's no support to that, right? So, but this is what we need to look at, and what direction we need to look at. The next step is to do the numbers. What's useful? Why? Why do we make these choices? What comes from those choices? Yeah. So.
Okay, so this is I'll just read the question. When you say we have to make these shifts, who exactly does that include?
That's an interesting question. So you often have this when you're trying to actually debate economic capitalism advocates who believe that the free market will take care of everything. When I say we, if someone doesn't do it, then it doesn't get done. I can't do it on my own, so I want to find a group of like-minded individuals to do it with me. That's the we. People I know personally. If everyone else doesn't want to do it or doesn't think it's sensible, fine, no problem. And we'll just diverge, and we'll see who actually is going to prosper.
Next one, I think, is mainly a comment. Says, thinking we could start with giving what we have lots of, like TV sets, etc., to be redistributed. This is very much like Goodwill. I have stopped buying anything I do not actually need. Great presentation, really diving into deep thinking. I need to go to work in the greenhouse and let this simmer and bubble up ideas.
I'm with you.
I guess Steve Sargent asks, with all the resources discarded in landfills, is landfill mining a component in this system?
Right, so the simple answer is yes, but it's complex. To get a process plant operational, you need the right residue with the right components in it, and you need it to be consistent. And what's in landfill is highly variable, and it's all over the place. So much so that if you just dig stuff up from landfill and you put it into a recycling plant, you get very poor recovery. So you've got to sort it into streams of like with like, but it's so complicated that the biggest waste corporations so far in the world have not been able to do it. We do need to clean up our landfill operations because there'll be a source of acidified drainage eventually. And yes, they have metals in them because that's where we put them all. It's not the recycling technology that needs to evolve, it's the sorting technology, which is not quite there yet. And it's the society who put the stuff there that needs to evolve so we can actually sort of have collection done at the point of distribution before it gets to the landfill. So the answer is it's complicated, but someone's got to do it. And yes, we're going to try and do it in this, because we're going to an area where there's nothing at the moment. And when we set up our systems, we're going to try and set up our waste transfer systems that will put like with like into piles that are useful.
No, I think we better stop. Let's give Simon a big hand. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I think this is the start, especially in horticultural sciences, the start of a bigger conversation that doesn't end here today. Thank you.